human population outside of Africa has much smaller genetic diversity than the people in Africa itself, because they are all descendants of a small group of Africans who moved out around 70,000 years ago. So this is the first class of migrations that shaped all of the world. So the answer to the question, who were the first Indians, who were the first Australians, who were the first Japanese, who were the first Americans, who were the first Europeans, the answer to all of those questions is just the same. They're all out of Africa migrants who moved out of Africa around 70,000 years ago. And so this is the first class of migrations that explains the human population groups as they are spread around the world. Now, as they were spreading around the world, something else happened, which is that what happened was there was a glacial age that intervened. There's a glacial age that intervened, and when glacial ages happen, what a glacial age means is that almost all of the world's, or a large part of the world's water, including in the seas, they get locked up in ice, which means there is very little evaporation, and which means there is very little rain, and which means there is great aridity, and large parts of the world become uninhabitable. So as modern humans were expanding around the world, starting around 29,000 years ago and around 12,000 years ago, there was this glacial age that made large parts of the world uninhabitable, and modern human population groups became separated from each other. And for as you can see, very large period of time. And you could say that during this period that they were separated from each other, minor genetic differences accumulated in different population groups, and that you can still see. But you could also see that these differences are really marginal, because all modern humans around the world share 99.9% of their genetic matter of their DNA. So differences that we are talking about are really minor in the larger scheme of things. Now, the second part of our story, the second class of migration start happening when the glacial age ends. What we then see in the archaeological record are modern humans in many different parts of the world experimenting with agriculture. Not everybody who started experimenting with agriculture succeeded, and even those who succeeded, many of them found it is not sustainable. But those population groups who were lucky enough to be in geographical regions where they had the opportunity to domesticate or experiment with cereals, that's rice, barley, wheat, etc., they found themselves to be very lucky, because these cereals, when you domesticate them, their productivity is very high, which means that they could, in fact, change their lifestyle from hunter-gatherers into farmers. They could settle down. You should realize that the very first experiments in agriculture may have happened in Southeast Asia, but they were not experimenting with cereal. They were experimenting with yams, bananas, tubers, and so on, and where the productivity is not that high. So we did not see agriculture happening in a large scale in Southeast Asia for the first time. Agriculture happens in areas where people could cultivate cereals. And these are people in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in India, and in China. These are the early centers of agricultural expansion that happens. And what happens when people take to agriculture and become farmers from hunter-gatherers? What happens immediately is a population explosion, because the population of farmers grows at a much faster rate. There's no comparison than the population growth rate of hunter-gatherers, whose populations grow in a very marginal and small manner. Their populations don't explode. So in groups that started, took to agriculture and became settled farmers, their populations grew very substantially, and the natural result of those population expansions were migrations. So from all these regions, there were significant migrations that happened into all the other regions around them. overwhelming whichever the small hunter-gatherer populations that were around. So this is the second class of migrations that shaped world population all over. That takes us to the third class of migrations, which happens when a particular modern human population group in Central Asia, in the steppe, which already had a large population of horses, they figured out how to ride a horse and combined that with mastery over metallurgy. And you can imagine that when a group of people master how to the art of riding a horse, they get the kind of mobility that no modern human population group before them ever had, and that's a very powerful advantage. So these groups who had acquired these mobilities then started migrating in a very large manner, and they changed the demography of a vast portion of Eurasia. They moved into Europe around 3000 BCE, or about 5,000 years ago. They moved into West Asia, they moved into South Asia, they moved all the way into parts of China. So they changed the demography of a very large part of Eurasia between around 5,000 years ago and 3,500 years ago, a very large period of time. And the areas where they spread to are also the areas where you can today see that Indo-European languages are dominant. The Indo-European languages, such as, of course, most of the North Indian languages, as also Persian or English or French or Italian, almost all of the Western European languages, with one exception, which belong to the previous communities of farmers. So this is the third class of migrations that changed demography across a vast part of migrations. And of course, the last class of migrations, which we have all heard about, which we all know about, or at least we know our parents and grandparents lived through it, which are the colonial migrations, which happened when a group of modern humans in Europe figured out how to cross the seas using new ways of how to move across seas into areas that were already populated and dominate them. They also discovered steamships, and the result of these colonial expansions and population movements was that they changed the demography of large parts of the world. All of the Americas, North and South, all of Australia, and many parts of the world. So these are the four classes of migrations that shaped world demography. So if you want to understand world demography, the first thing that you have to understand is that how did these four classes of migrations shape population in a particular region? So that takes us so let us look at how does this apply in the case of India. I'll go back to the presentation. Sorry, I cannot find the presentation, so I would move on. So how does this apply to the Indian population? You have to ask, who were the first modern humans to arrive in India? They were, as we discussed, the out of Africa migrants. And when did they reach? The question is, when did they reach India? We know that they left Africa around 70,000 years ago. And the best assumption that we can make is that they reached India around 65,000 years ago. Why is that? We do not have old enough fossils recovered from the Indian subcontinent to arrive at this estimate, but we have fossils and other evidence from Australia that suggests that modern humans were there by 59,000 years ago, that they were in East Asia by by slightly earlier. So the best estimate that we can today have is that they were in India by around 65,000 years ago. And did they move into a land that was empty in the sense that they had no competition from no close competitors? No, they moved into a land that was already very robustly populated by other Homo species, not modern humans, not Homo sapiens, but other related, but our cousins, our evolutionary cousins who were there in large numbers. How do we know they were here in large numbers? We know that from the stone tools that they left behind in large numbers. The oldest stone tool that we have was recovered from a place called Athirampakam in Tamil Nadu near Chennai, and that's about 1.5 million years ago. Modern humans arose only about 300,000 years ago. So, but we are saying that other Homo species has been in India more than 5 times as long. So we do not know which specific Homo species they belong to, because we only have one portion of a skull that we have of this earlier population, and we have not been able to determine which particular lineage that they belong to. So, but we can definitely say that when the modern humans arrived in India, we arrived in a land that was already robustly occupied by our evolutionary cousins, and they were present in large numbers, particularly in the southern peninsula and the central Indian plateau. So you're talking about when they arrived in India. So archaeologists today talk about that they argue that the modern humans arrived in India would have occupied India in what they call as in stages, not at one go, but in different stages. It is likely that initially they would have stayed out of the areas which were dominated by the other Homo species, and that's because the assumption that we often had that modern humans were infinitely superior to other Homo species when they arrived on the scene is not correct. They both made more or less the same kind of tools. They both had similar kind of brains. So modern humans, through most of the time that they shared the world with other Homo species, had no great advantage over them. So it is likely that the first modern humans arrived in India initially stayed out of the way of the already established population, and it's likely that they would have followed a sub-Himalayan route, and some of their ancestors then would have some of their descendants then would have moved on to Southeast Asia and ultimately to Australia and also other parts of Asia. And from the evidence that we today have, it is likely that they were in modern humans came to be in a dominant position in the subcontinent only by around 35,000 years ago. Because in India, as well as in everywhere else around the world, all the other Homo species went extinct in many parts when modern humans came there, but in some parts even before that. And it is reasonable for us to assume by around 35,000 years ago, other Homo species went extinct in India as well, and that the modern humans were in a dominant position. Now, one of the questions that we often have heard or we have often asked ourselves is that where can we find them? Where are these first Indians, and where do we have to go to find them? Do we have to go to the Andamans? The surprising answer is that no, you have to mostly look into the mirror or look around. Why is that? Because we now know today that 50 to 65% of the ancestry of most population groups in India today come from the first Indians who arrived here 65,000 years ago. So the ancestry and the lineage of the first Indians are today with us. And in the as I describe it in the book, this is the base of the Indian demographic pizza. This is the base. Without the base, there's no pizza. And it is this base, this common base of the ancestry of the first Indians. That's common, not just all of South Asia. That's what makes South Asia distinct, because this is an ancestry that is specific to South Asia, and it's not something that you would find commonly outside of it. Now that takes us to so when did the second class of migrations, or agriculture-related migrations, when did that happen as far as India is concerned, and what can we know about it? The earliest agriculture that happened in the Indian subcontinent is the evidence that we have is from a place called Mehergarh in the Balochistan province of Pakistan, in today's Pakistan. And that goes back to about probably around 7,000 BCE, or about 9,000 years ago. And then we can see from Mehergarh in Balochistan, you can see the agriculture spreading all across the northwestern region of India, into Gujarat, into Sindh, across the entire region. And it is this agricultural revolution that gradually develops over thousands of years into the Harappan civilization. And you can see it's a continuous development. There is no break in between. And you can see that the Harappan civilization grows naturally out of the agricultural revolution that happened in northwestern India. The mature period of the Harappan civilization was between 2600 BCE and about 1900 BCE, so about 700 years. So who were the people who were these Harappans? What can we know about them? What genetics says today, and this is not something that we knew for sure earlier, is that the people who spread the Harappan civilization, spread the agriculture around the northwestern India, and therefore were the creators of the Harappan civilization, were a mix of the first Indians who were here around 65,000 years ago, and another population related to the earliest farmers of Iran, who would have been in India from at least around 12,000 years ago. Meaning that this is this mixed population that started agriculture in northwestern India, that then spread all across, and then went on to create the Harappan civilization. But this is only the second. This is the second class of migrations, and this is agriculture in the northwestern India. But there is also another agriculture-related migration that happened into India, and that is from East Asia. And this happened as a result of China taking to agriculture, and that led to population expansion and significant migrations. 2 rounds of migrations from China. One that took the island hopping route and populated many parts of Oceania, Southeast Asia, etc. And another route that took the land route, again through Southeast Asia, and parts and the tail of that migration reached India around 4,000 years ago or a little later, and they brought Austroasiatic languages with them. These are languages such as Khasi and Mundari, which are spoken by tribals in central India and eastern India. And so there are 2 kinds of agricultural migrations that shaped Indian population. One from as a result of the agricultural expansion in northwestern India, and one from East Asia. That takes us then to the last 4th large migrations, and that's from the steppe, Central Asian steppe, the same population group that moved into Europe around 5,000 years ago. We now know from genetic evidence that they moved into South Asia and into India between 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE. That's a period of about 500 years, when populations from the Central Asian steppe region, today known as Kazakhstan, and who spoke Indo-Aryan languages, moved into India, between 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE. So these are the four large migrations that form the constituents of the Indian demography. The original out of Africa migrants who have been here since 65,000 years ago, the population related to Iranian farmers from regions today known as Zagros Mountains, which would form. These are populations related to those people in those regions, and third from East Asia, who brought Austroasiatic languages, and fourth from the Central Asian steppe region that brought Indo-Aryan languages into Indian population. So the next period that happens, so by around 1500 BCE, right, or about 3,500 years ago, what you see is that all the components that today make the Indian population are in. The out of Africa first Indians are in, the West Asians are in, the East Asians are in, and so are the Central Asians. What we then see happening over the next many centuries, between 2000 BCE and about 100 CE, is a mixing between these population groups of the kind that has never been seen earlier or later. So today, if anybody were to ask you what's the most tumultuous period in the history of India, there should be no doubt in saying that it is this period, between around 2000 BCE and about the beginning of the Common Era, that 2000-year period. Just think of all that happened within that period. First of all, the Harappan civilization, which I said existed between in its mature form existed between 2600 BCE and 1900 BCE, started declining around 1900 BCE because of a long drought that affected not just the Harappan civilization but many other civilizations of its time, including the Mesopotamian civilizations. So a civilization, the largest civilization of this time, we often do not realize it. The Harappans realize this. The Harappan civilization was the largest civilization of its time, as big as the Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations put together in terms of both area and population. And it was very unique. It is nothing like what you would see in Mesopotamian or Egyptian civilizations. The most striking difference being, for example, that you would in the Harappan civilization, you would not see large palaces or large temples or large statues of kings. There is which are common in the Mesopotamian or Egyptian civilization, whether it is the pyramids or in the Mesopotamian civilizations, you have large burials for their kings, and buried with them are not merely treasures, but also their servants to help them in their afterlife. In the Harappan civilization, you see nothing of this kind. You do not see large temples. You do not see large palaces. You do not see large statues of kings, and you do not see large, luxurious burials. And mind you, it's not because they did not have luxurious jewelries, because in fact, many of the jewelries that were buried with the kings, with the royalty in the Mesopotamian civilization, came from the Harappan civilization. They were made there. Many of the jewelries and other precious things. So what we can see is that the Harappan civilization had very unique impulses, and it was run, or it was organized in a very different manner from the rest of the civilizations of its time. But anyway, that's a separate thing altogether. So to continue the story, the Harappan civilization started declining around 1900 BCE because of a long drought. And what you then see are people moving out, large numbers of people moving in search of new life. And they moved eastwards into northern India, southwards into southern India. So, in fact, the demographic pizza of India, there is the underlying base, which is the first Indians, You have to look at the Harappan people as the source that spread over the over the base, and that's a unifying the culture that spread across the Indian subcontinent. And then you have the Chis, the Indo-Aryan language speakers from Central Asia, who also spread across India, initially only in the northern parts, but ultimately across uh, much of the country. And of course, then there are other migrations that happened, including the most major one of them, which is you could see it as these toppings, including the most major one from East Asia, which brought Austroasiatic languages. And then, of course, there are many other migrations that happened after all this. And but a key thing that you have to remember is that we spoke of these four migrations, and we have to remember that after the Central Asian steppe migrations, the migrations that happened after that did not cause a large impact on our demography. And that stands for the colonial migrations also. The colonial migrations, as we said earlier, changed the demography in many parts of the world, but it did not leave a major dent or a major impact on the Indian population, because the number of colonialists who came were far too small compared to the population of India. And that applies to all the other major migrations that happened in history too, whether it's the Sakas, the Huns, the Persians, the Arabs, Mughals, all of them. They all had left an impact on our culture in many different ways. But the genetic impact that they left on our migration, on our population, is not large. So if you have to understand Indian demography, this is what you have to understand. These are the four major components of our demography. And that's why you can say, and this way of understanding it has major implications for us. For example, the rest of the Indian population has often looked at the tribals as people who are very different from them. But we know today is that that's not true. If the rest of the population has no relatives anywhere in the world closer than the tribals, because we share the same ancestry of the first Indians that is unique to South Asia, and that's the largest ancestry that all Indian population groups share. So the difference between the distance and the difference that the rest of the population assumes that it has with the tribals is not a reality. So that has to go. Second part of the that will come. I mean, so when we talked about this great mixing that happened, the only population group that did not take part in this mixing were the Andaman and Islanders and Nicobar Islanders, because they were cut off from the mainland and they did not experience these successive agriculture-related or steppe migrations. So therefore, they did not go through the same mixing as the population in the mainland did. So there's a point to some extent in saying, where can we go and find the first Indian ancestry? You may find to some extent a slightly unmixed population in the Andaman Islands. Even that is not entirely correct, because in recent times, especially after the British colonization, there has been very significant population mixing that happened with people from the mainland moving into Andaman and Nicobar. But this is the population history. But remember, we said this is the population mixing that happened between 2000 BC and the beginning of the Common Era. What happened after the beginning of the Common Era? That's a different story. Genetics tells us that this mixing came to an end around 100 BCE. Why so? I mean, you have to look at it as a period rather than an exact, year. But around that period, the mixing came to an end by and large, because Indian population groups started practicing endogamy, which is the practice of marrying within your own groups. So after the mixing had already taken place in substantive ways, many parts of the Indian, many population groups in many parts of the subcontinent started practicing endogamy, and since endogamy is the distinguishing feature of the caste system, we could assume that that is around the time when the caste system also began falling into place. We do not have, this is new genetic information about endogamy. So we do not yet have clear understanding of what exactly caused this then. But this also changes many of the existing assumptions. Because, for example, there was an existing assumption that the caste system began with the arrival of steppe migrants around, between 4000 BC, 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE. Now we know that that's not true, because there was significant mixing that happened after their arrival. So it is not correct to say that the caste system began with the arrival of the Central Asian migrants of the migrants, because and we know this also from our ancient literature, that there was significant mixing of, because many of the rishis, for example, had mothers who would later, in later culture, would be looked upon as not exactly of a lower caste. So you would say that caste system is not a result of migrations that happened much hundreds of years earlier, but is the result of a political development that happened only around 2000 BCE. So what is the result of all this? What is the result of all this is that today, what this explains is that today, no matter where in the caste hierarchy you stand, no matter what language you speak, no matter what region you inhabit, we all share a very significant part of our ancestry, starting with our first Indian ancestry. And our cultural parts, many of which started happening in the Harappan civilization, which has been carried over. So that's the story of our and how we came to be as a population, and it's an exciting story, because we created a common civilization of multiple. We created a common civilization and a common history out of multiple streams of migrations that happened over thousands of years. And the evidence of those migrations are there, both in our history and in the way that we have created the Indian civilization. So I would be, as I would say in the book, the best way to summarize the new findings is that we are all Indians, and we are all migrants, and we are all mixed. Thank you very much. If there are any questions.
Now the platform is open for discussion.
Yes.
So anyone has any question, please type it in the chat box.
Sir, one doubt.
Yes. Vandana Undi has asked.
From the Department of History.
Yeah.
You mentioned about Caucasian. What about your opinion about Caucasian origin? People that migrated from Central Asia.
I can't hear you properly.
Or the Turkey region.
Sorry, I cannot hear you properly.
No, ma'am, it would be great if you could type your question in the box.
Sir?
Yes.
What about your opinion about the migration that comes to India? The people from Caucasian mountains.
No, I think that I think we have much greater understanding into the population mixings that happened all across the region, including Caucasus now, than we had earlier. The migrations that I spoke about, the Yamnaya population, right? The Yamnaya population of Central Asia that moved into Europe around 3000 BCE. Now, the Yamnaya population itself is a mixture of what's the earlier hunter-gatherer populations of Central Asia with the Caucasian populations who moved up into Central Asia. So that's the population that made the Yamnaya population. Yamnaya population then moves into Europe, and after they move into Europe and they mix with some of the existing farmer populations of Europe, then they come back. The Yamnaya population, the civilization or the Yamnaya culture comes to an end around soon after that, and then it splinters into multiple cultures. And it is the later flow back after their migration into Europe that then takes them back to back into Central Asia, and they spread all across Central Asia, which we can see in the genetic from the ancient DNA evidence. So the population that came to India, the South Asia, comes from regions that are today known as Kazakhstan, and that's the population that came. Now, if you're talking, so that's the migration that happened around between 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE. Does that answer your question?
Okay, sir. Sir, one question. A group of people that migrated from that West Asia, that is a Esseni group, that those people that migrated to Kerala, or that people that related to the megalithic culture.
It is not. So we are talking about. If you're talking about the migrations that led to there is a migration that led to the. That is related to the agricultural revolution in northwestern India, and that is a population that reached there. That reached. An objective answer based on evidence, I think. So I would say what is possible, what a historian can look for is bounded objectivity or limited objectivity, which is to say that did this happen or that happen, and to make sure that whatever perspectives on when you answer questions that are related to why, and that the writer be aware that that answer requires multiple perspectives. Does that answer, Vandana?
Okay, sir. Next is Dr. Sarda Case asks, in spite of your path-breaking evidences on DNA research, Aryan debate is still lingering among the historians. How do you?
I think this is a lot to the extent that a lot of the debate around this is because of what shall I say? A lack of. It's not necessarily among historians, but among people who are for political movements. For this is a critical issue in which they have an interest, and therefore the definitions often get mixed up. For example, even now it's surprising to see people talk about Arya or Aryan in terms of race. It is very clear that we are not talking about race when you're talking about Arya. It is Indo-Aryan languages. It is the language speakers that we are talking about. And that applies to others also. When we talk about Dravidia, Dravidians. We are not talking about a Dravidian race. It would be difficult to find what's the Dravidian race. We are talking about a culture. We are talking about a language. It's people who speak a particular family of languages, and that's so. First, we need to be clear about the definitions. A lack of these definitions often cause problems. Second, we now know that all populations are mixed. There is no such thing as a pure race. Pure race is a meaningless word. All populations we now know are mixtures of previous populations that existed, and those previous populations are mixtures of even more previous populations that existed. There is no population group in the world today that you can take up and say this is a pure race. Race as a construct has to go. So I think it is lack of understanding of these two things, that there is no such thing as a race, and that area is not a racial term, that causes much of the debate. And that debate you do not see. That's not a debate that you see necessarily in the academic literature. If you check in academic literature, you will not see. But if you check the social media or the media in general, you will see this is an ongoing debate.
So the next question is from Dr. Rashmi KP.
Yeah.
What's your point of view of Kiradi excavations?
I think it is. I have been to Kiradi, and
Southern Indian history.
Yes, I think the Kiradi excavations have a huge potential to change the way that we look at the Indian history, especially the periods that we would talk about as the second urbanization. The first urbanization was the Harappan civilization, right? Because that's the first urbans or first cities that we see rising in the Indian subcontinent. But after the Harappan civilization went into decline, we had to wait more than 1,000 years for the next cities to rise up again. Most of it in the eastern part and regions that could be known as Magadha, outside of Aryavarta. Not all, but a large part of it. But in all this, it was assumed that the South India was not part of this early second urbanization, and I think that is what Kiradi might throw more light on. We need to wait for the final research reports to be out, but Kiradi could really throw more light on the second urbanization and how widespread it was, and what role did South India play in that also. And that is one part. Second part is that the Kiradi excavations bring far more light to Sangam literature, because there was a great reluctance among many people to take, in terms of taking the Sangam literature to centuries before the Common Era, because we did not have evidence for Sangam literature. Is very urban in its in its sensitivities, in the way that it describes things, and there were.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir? Okay. In our mythology, which has its roots in
Your voice.
social conditions.
Your voice is too much disturbance. There's too much disturbance, Rashmi.
Hema teacher, mic on off cheyana.
Oh, Hema teacher, you can ask yourself. We'll be switching off your mic.
Okay, I think I found the in our mythology, which has its roots in social conditions. Often, period of archaeology was opted for wars. I'm not sure what that means. You're saying what began only 7,000 years ago? Hello, I do not understand the question. Hello?
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Hemambika Verma from the Department of English. I've been greatly interested in archaeology. So I've been reading up on mythology in relation to archaeology. Mythology means just poetry written by a person who exaggerates something a little bit about the topics around him. So we cannot just push it away, right? Can't say that it didn't happen. So I read in the newspapers that the Mahabharata war was fought probably about 4,000 BC or 3,601 specifically, or before that 4,000 and even 7,000 is mentioned. So I would like to know whether all that all those stuff that we get from the newspapers are actually true. Being an archaeologist and a historian, you'd be able to tell us more about this. The marine archaeology that shows Dwarka underwater and all those other remnants there, all those tend to prove that we have had. Yes, sir. Hello, yes, sir.
Yeah, the Dwarka underwater excavation. There's been far too much. Fake news about it. Fake news about it. You have to actually look at there was a webinar that was actually done by the person who had done the excavations. It was on Facebook. If you get in touch with me, maybe I can find it for you. And there is nothing that has been found from the underwater Dwarka excavations that changes any understanding that we currently have in any substantive manner. There has been too much, what shall I say, WhatsApp and other stories about it without enough evidence. And I think people should look at what the people who excavated have said in their reports. And when you read them, it is interesting, but it is not something that changes our understanding of current chronology of Indian history. And the second question, I think, was about the period of Mahabharata war, etc. These are things I do not think we have as yet clarity on enough to be able to put a date on it. Because there are layers and layers of these are stories that have gone through layers and layers of and hundreds of years. The stories have been recited and transmitted orally before they were written down. And to what extent and you can find it actual archaeological evidence for it, that would be tough. The way to think about this would be that if you assume that you could not have had a Mahabharata war before there were chariots and horse riding, and that is one way of looking at it. And then you could say that there's no evidence for chariots anywhere in the world before 2000 BCE. So these are some ways in which you can start thinking about where you have some idea of chronologically worldwide, not just in India, but chronologically worldwide of earliest developments of various things, and you can then look at mentions of that in the in the epics, and therefore we can arrive at a certain maximum time periods before which it could not have happened. So other than that, it would be tough until we come across specific archaeological evidence of these wars, which would be very tough, I would imagine. Does that answer the question?
So there
Hello?
is one more question.
Yeah.
How can we analyze the case Romas or Gypsies? Are they of Indian origin? Which group of Indians are they?
They are of Indian origins. This is one question that has been answered fairly clearly, and it's very interesting also. They are from India, from regions around Rajasthan, Gujarat, that part. They went out of India around 1,500 years ago. And the interesting thing is that even genetic studies have been done, and they carry their what's called the mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA that is transferred from mother to daughter to daughter to daughter, only through the maternal line, and many of them carry a maternal line, mtDNA lineage that is specific. Not only that it is specific to India, it is the most common in India, and you do not find it outside of India, outside of South Asia, except in the Roma. So this is so there is no longer any doubt about the origin of the Romas. They do come from India. The interesting thing is that, there has often been an assumption that assumption about how did, which is related to the question about how did Indo-European languages spread? How are the Indo-European languages spread around the world as they are? Meaning, you would find Indo-European languages being spoken in Iceland at one end. The westernmost would be spoken in Iceland. Easternmost would be Bangladesh. To the east of Bangladesh, you will not find anybody speaking any Indo-European language. So it is this area which covers a lot of Eurasia that speaks Indo-European languages. Why is it spread in this manner? And the argument that is, of course, accepted, the mainstream argument that all linguists and everybody accepts, is that this is explained by the migrations of Central Asian steppe pastoralists into Europe and into Central Asia and West Asia, all the way across to parts of China. Now, the alternative explanation is that no, it spread from India to the rest of the world. The problem with this argument is that if an Indian population movement is what caused the spread of languages to be spread in this manner all around the world, then you should see an evidence of Indian genetic evidence of Indian genetic streams being spread all the way across to Iceland. And but that we do not see. But we do see it in the case of the Roma, which means that when there is actually in reality a real migration of people from India to the West, we do see the genetic imprint of that migration. And we do not see that elsewhere because, as we discussed earlier, the South Asian ancestry is not something that is, the first Indian ancestry is not something that is seen in outside of South Asia. So this in a way also explains. So this Roma ancestry is interesting because when there is actually a movement, and they could not have taken, Indian languages to the rest of the world because that population movement came too late. It's around 1,500 years ago, and Indo-European languages were spread around the world much before that. So when there is an actual population movement from India to the West or wherever, we can, and a substantial movement, we can actually see evidence of it in the genetic record.
Thank you, sir, for answering all the questions. All participants are supposed to fill the feedback form immediately. Now, I invite Dr. Rashmi Keti, Head of Department of Economics, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you for inviting me for vote of thanks. Let me first clear you. I'm not a doctor yet. I'm just submitting my thesis. So let me start. Respected Chief Guest, Mr. Tony Joseph, popular historian, journalist, and eminent writer. Respected Principal, Dr. Padma P., we are invited participants of the webinar, both faculty and students, coordinator and conveners of the webinar. Good afternoon. It is with great joy and pride that I thank Mr. Tony Joseph, our resource person for today. It was a brilliant talk, sir. We all know that he is the author of one of the most important books that came along in this tumultuous times. Early Indians, the story of our ancestors and where we came from. To be precise, Mr. Tony Joseph is a journalist, a popular historian, but for me and for the people who follow him on his social media accounts, he is representing the voice of this particular point of history of our nation and of the world. He's courageous. Yes, I should use that word. His courageous articles, tweets, and above all, his best-selling book, which is currently being translated into all the official languages of India, including Malayalam, is a much-needed revelation about the unity of our nation. It gives us hope that at the end, there is always light. I consider him as a friend, a guide, and above all, a concerned citizen of India. It is with great pleasure that I expressing my gratitude. I hope this associationship can go on in the future to hopefully offline after the pandemic. 2 months ago, I casually slided into his Twitter message box and asked for a talk. It was near casual. It was a casual inquiry. And he said yes. Wow, he said yes. And thank you, sir, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you from me and all my institutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rashmi. Thank you. I enjoyed the interaction. And as I said, I grab every opportunity that I can to talk to fellow Malayalis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Next, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, let me continue. Next, I would like to thank beloved Principal Dr. Padma P., our beacon and role model. She's always there for us, supporting and encouraging us, both as faculties and students. Thank you, ma'am. I would like to thank the coordinator of the webinar, Dr. Sarda K.S., HOD, PG Department of History. Thank you, ma'am. Next, the conveners, Ms. Radhika Lal, Department of History, Mr. Lijo Choni, Department of Economics. Thank you, dears. I would also like to thank Mr. Rahul Dutt, our system admin. These are the persons who are the reasons behind the smooth running of the webinar. Thank you once again. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our invited participants of the webinar, faculties from around Kerala, and my dearest students. Thank you all for your participation and enthusiasm. Thank you. Thank you very much. I conclude my vote of thanks by repeating the essence of the book. We are all migrants. We are all Indians. We are all migrants. We are one. Thank you. Thank you. Over to you, Radhika.
Let's conclude the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you for please fill in the feedback.
Thank you all.
Thank you.